No mai haere mai. It's great to have you all here to the first of the NDF webinar sessions. So my name is Teina Herzer and I am the Executive Director of NDF. I've been working in digital for 1,000 years and I've done a lot of CMSs and websites and whatnot. And I'm extremely pleased to be joined today by Amy de Hamel, who is the CEO of Pixel Fusion, which is a development company here up in Auckland. She has been working a long time in technical strategy and product development. She's worked with a lot of GLAM organizations, including with me at Motat. She is an experienced developer and user of Headless CMS, and she brings a really great working style. I love working with Amy because she is collaborative and user-centric, and she helps us create incredible digital experiences. So welcome to Amy.
Thanks, Teina. It's going to be an interesting one today, I think.
I'll start us off with a quick karakia. So, Mauri oho, Mauri tū, Mauri ora, kia tātou, haumie, huie, taikie. So thank you very much for joining. Feel free to turn on your cameras or not. I should let you know the session is being recorded. And we have people have given us their questions in advance, which is brilliant. So we've got a list to get through, but we also welcome questions to be submitted during our discussion. We're just going to be chatting today, so it's going to be pretty informal. So feel free to submit any questions you have in the chat, and Holly will be taking care of those. Also, if you want to ask a question without writing it, just use the raise your hand function on Zoom. We'll keep an eye out. We'll be pausing at times to take questions and discussion. So like I said, hopefully this is more of an informal thing. And we're going to move at reasonable pace as well, because we've got quite a few questions that have come in advance. And so we're going to try and get through them all. Awesome. It's super weird not being able to see you guys. I can just see Amy. We're just going to chat like you're not here. It's super crazy weird. All right. So first question, what is a headless CMS?
Yes, it's a question we get asked pretty often, to be fair. I guess I might actually screen share. I've got a little visual that I did manage to find to give a bit of a feel of what we're talking about here. So I'm assuming everyone on the call is familiar with the term CMS as a whole, right? So we're talking about a content management system of some form for a website. The main difference that you'll have between what we're calling headless CMS and what's more traditional is the fact that it's decoupled from the actual front end of the website. That's the biggest difference that you're going to have. So the whole management of all the actual content elements themselves, that could be things like content blocks with titles, a bit of copy, a CTA button, and an image, are held in one system, and they then are pushed through to your front end. So for those that aren't familiar with the kind of technical side of a website, that's your primary difference, is that distinction there. It comes with a whole lot of different elements that are key to consider. One is that it allows you to go one-to-many. That's a pretty big one. So you can have all of your content managed in one place at the back, and it can go to multiple sites or multiple locations. So on-prem and off-prem is probably one of the key things that you'll see with the museum environment. But then you can also tie it into other systems as well. Benefit of it is it comes without as much load. So when it comes to the traditional CMS, you're kind of tied into everything being in that yellow block on the left-hand side there. So you've got your back end, your code, any plugins, and the website itself. So if you have anything unoptimized or any issues in there, it's going to impact the whole site. So performance-wise, there's quite a big difference. That's my understanding on a more technical perspective of a headless CMS. Teina, have you had any better explanations your end?
No, similar diagrams really. But I think the main reason I've used it in the past and like to use them is that centralized point of content management, and then there's that flexibility in terms of you can feed that content out in many different front end solutions, and so you're not locked in to sort of this is my website, this is what it looks like, and this is what it will look like forever. I can go beyond my website to apps and to social media management systems and et cetera, and displays within galleries and whatnot.
Absolutely.
Cool. So you've touched on a couple of them there, but what are some of the pros and cons just of having a headless content management system over a traditional content management system?
Yeah, so the pros are the main reasons why we're seeing pardon me, a lot of people moving to it, not just in the glamour sector, but I'm actually struggling to think of any of our clients currently that aren't in headless CMS in one shape or form. And it's mostly because of the flexibility. So when you're dealing with headless CMS, you can kind of pick and choose the right one that's going to plug into your entire stack, if you will. And it's going to integrate to all the other solutions that you've got. So it's a nice way for you to just pick and mix exactly what you need. You're not kind of locked into an overall structure. And it gives you flexibility to really customize. And we're seeing that differentiation coming through. So you can do some really neat and interesting things on your front end site for engagement. And then you can do some really different things on premise or in other example sites. So, for example, with Motat, there might be several sites running. We've got the aviation hall, that kind of stuff. So there's lots of different locations where that content is feeding through, and you've got the flexibility to do that in any way, shape, or form that you want. That's probably the biggest power of a headless CMS. It's also faster. So because you've got a decoupling between the back end and the actual front end of the website, the front end side is generally static. So you might have heard of Gatsby, Next.js, those kind of stacks that are out there. And it basically means that the site can run a lot faster from a performance perspective, which is fantastic, especially when you have high visit loads. And then it also means that you've got more security because you are dealing with a static site. Someone can't come in and hack your front site. So it's a lot more secure than the standard ones that are out there. Those are some of the pros and probably the main ones that come up.
Just to clarify for people, that's one where you're not generating the information on the fly every time someone comes and calls it. It's actually sitting there ready to be just served. It's a flat, almost like a page in a book ready to be read. It's not calling on the database every time.
Exactly. So yeah, sorry for those that aren't familiar with the term static site. So that leans into one of the cons. It means that every time you want to make a change on the site, you're essentially republishing it as a whole or rebuilding the site from scratch. So if you treat it like a Lego set, right? So you put it together, you've got a Lego DeLorean or whatever it is that you've built. You go in and you change one aspect of it. It's actually going to very quickly rebuild it and put that right back up again. So there is a build delay. That's kind of the differences there with Headless CMS. Few things to consider around that, if you're not using it already, is thinking about how that's going to impact stuff like previews and how it's going to impact stuff like build times. Sorry. So you've got the option with how you set it up as to whether you have the full build happen every single time. That might mean that when you hit publish, it takes 10 minutes for that new page or that new article to actually be present on your website. Or you might have more an iterative one, which means that you can bring that time down. And then some headless CMS options out there actually have built-in preview functionality, or they're kind of more visually closer to what you're going to see on screen. Whereas others like Contentful look very different in the back end to how they're going to present on screen. So you need to think about some sort of preview functionality being set up there. Those are probably the largest pros and cons that I've found. Aside from the smaller sites that you're going to have out there as well, I think the main thing to call out if you're a much smaller organization is going to be the availability of templates. It's not as common when you're dealing with a headless CMS because it is built to be customized. So it's built for you to do whatever you want with the front end. You're not going to get as many website templates as you would with something more standard like a WordPress.
And so as a user, because you and I are both users of these headless CMSs as well as developers of them, so what are some of the key differences that I would or you would experience when you're actually, creating and managing content?
Yeah. The biggest difference, I think, that you find from a traditional CMS with more of a WYSIWYG interactive screen to going to a headless CMS is that concept of not directly seeing what it is you're building. So that preview switch is really important. So understanding how preview works so that you can see the changes you're making reflected is pretty important. The other thing that's probably the biggest thing to get around early days is going to be the content model structure and how that actually works. So if you're at the should we do headless CMS, how do we implement it stage, content modeling, take the time to think about it, because if you get that wrong, changing it in the back end is really difficult. So when we're talking about content modeling, we're talking about breaking all the aspects of your website down into little blocks. So it might be that you've got the difference between what would be a good example? So you've got a block in there that talks about a gallery of images, right? So that block of gallery of images is a type of piece that sits in your website. You can create as many different versions of it as you like, or you can reuse the same version as many times as you like across different pages as well. So really useful for things like primary CTAs that you're wanting to, slip in across the site, or you might have featured blocks for exhibitions that are coming up or items that you're wanting to entice. Again, you can easily slot those in across your site as well. So it becomes a bit more of a building block structure, plug and play, rather than a web page builder, which is what you might be more familiar with some of the more traditional CMS platforms.
It really is a content management system, isn't it? Because you are actually looking at each individual piece of content and going, okay, this is, as you say, this is a call to action, or maybe this is just my, like a logo banner, and I want that to appear on my website, but I also want it to appear on my digital displays in my museum or in my gallery.
Absolutely. So that piece of content, depending on how the content model is structured, can be applied across multiple sites. So if we had some really cool 3D rendered content around the planes for the aviation hall that sat on an on-premise exhibition, but that's still available in the CMS. So if you wanted to make that available within an article or an exhibition page on the website, you've got the ability to tie those things together, which is really exciting. From a day-to-day basis, I think the other thing that is key to think about in regards to the content management side of things is that you have a lot less control over how it looks and feels on the front site. So if you go in and you're adding a piece of content, you don't need to worry about whether you make something bold, whether it's going to align left, whether it's going to align right, how it's going to fit on the page. All of that's dealt with through how the site is designed, which is fantastic. So it actually takes away that concern and risk of breaking the site in any way, shape, or form. It becomes really hard to do. So if you've got more junior staff and they're making a lot of updates, it gives you a lot more control and security over that side of things as well.
And it makes reusing each of those individual pieces easier, because the front end actually decides, oh, I'm gonna show this a little bit differently this time. I'm going to resize it slightly differently, or
Yeah, it can look completely different on the front end, but the same piece of content. Yeah.
Oh, so one of the questions we had come through was how do headless CMSs handle user-generated content?
It's a good question. So there's a couple of different ways that you can kind of play with user-generated content. So you've got what are some of the common ones we see come through, things like reviews, things like social media, and then you've got deeper user-generated content as well. So that might be storytelling or expressing history with one of the objects that's in your gallery, that kind of thing, right? So the main thing is just having an input. So what you can have is whether that is a little review form on a website or a mobile app, through to a larger, more interactive experience on a digital screen where someone could record themselves or type something in, to tapping into social feeds. Any of those options, you can kind of pull that information through into your headless CMS, and then like any content in your CMS, you can do with it as you will. So you could push those reviews from a mobile app on site out to your website, or you could push it to a digital screen like a live event, those kind of things as well. So there's some interesting things you can do to lift and shift content around. With user-generated content, the main thing is generally going to be thinking about some form of curation. So having a place set up within the headless CMS where that information is going to feed in, so it can be reviewed, curated, and pushed up. Always recommend with user-generated stuff that there's some set of eyes that are going over it before it automatically flows through to somewhere else.
So it's actually even more powerful, I think, to deal with user-generated content, because you do have that. It basically ingests it sits there in your content management system for you to review, and then you can go publish to a web page, but also maybe publish to an exhibition, for example, if you're showing, and you know, again, you don't have to worry about restyling that or anything. It's done all in the front end of that exhibition. So, and you don't have to build a new back end to take that user generated content in. So you're not building a new exhibition piece of software. You can actually just use your Headless CMS for that.
Yeah, and once it's built once, you can reapply it wherever you want to as well. So across multiple exhibitions or across completely different areas as well. So it could be a game that you're playing on an online portal as well.
Oh, I'm going to pause now and ask, does anyone have any questions or comments? Holly, have we had anything come in? Feel free to chime in or raise your hand or chat.
Nothing's come in.
Okay, we're keeping up. Excellent. Well, we'll keep going because we do have quite a few questions. So now we've touched on this a little bit. One of the questions was around, so some of our websites, obviously we're lucky with having collections and all the beautiful imagery that accompanies it and all the content that we sit on, but it can mean that some of the performance and speeds of our websites are leave a little bit less to be desired. So how does you have touched on the static side of things in terms of how a headless CMS can help with that. Do headless CMSs provide any other sort of features around optimization or performance improvement?
Yeah, so there's the main performance improvement you're going to see is leveraging static sites where you can. Obviously, there'll be some examples where you don't want to have a static site. You need it to dynamically change and update. But with Headless CMS, you can have a bit of both, right? So you could have a static site for your primary marketing site, and then you might have an online digital exhibition that's going on, and you want that to be really reactive and constantly updating with new information. So that could be written in something else. So you can optimize each of them differently, which is great. So you're not having everything tied together in one block. The other kind of main thing that you've got, especially with the glam sector, is videos and images. So focusing on tools that have those kind of optimizations. Most headless CMS platforms have really good tools around that. So making sure you're looking at those. If you haven't done one recently, run a Lighthouse report and see what kind of performance you're getting through at the moment. It's always worth keeping on top of that because things do constantly change and that's going to impact your score as you come through. To be fair though, there are some good traditional CMS platforms as well that have, sorry, what was that, Teina?
Oh, just how do you run a Lighthouse report for those of us that haven't?
For those of you that don't know, if you Google Lighthouse by Google, there's an extension on Chrome that you can use. It's a really worthwhile report to run. So it's going to give you some instant insight scores for your performance and accessibility. For those of you that are in the digital marketing space as well, it gives you some kind of SEO scores and bits and pieces there too. Primarily from our side, we focus on accessibility at the moment is quite a key one. We're finding quite a few low scores coming out and there's some easy fixes you can do to spin that up, which is great. But outside of this conversation, and then the other one's performance. Yeah, awesome. And the primary one with performance is going to be around imagery. It's quite interesting with the performance one. So one example that I have at the moment is you've got Silver Stripe, which for those of us that have been doing websites for a little bit longer, probably have used a Silver Stripe site at some point. They've got two different options. You can either use them as a traditional CMS or you can use them as a headless CMS. If you look at that example, there's a dramatic performance difference using Silver Stripe, the exact same platform as headless versus their hosted solution. So yeah, we've transitioned a lot of people from the hosted to the headless purely for performance sake.
I had the experience in terms of optimization tools of we use Contentful, which is one of the headless CMS systems, one of the bigger ones. And we could actually use that almost as a digital asset management system, not for our collections, obviously, but for our marketing imagery. And we could upload, full res imagery, up to sort of, I think, what was our limit? Was it 5 gigs or something? It was really huge anyway. We could have massive images in there, and the optimization happened on the fly through the Contentful system. So that was really great. Not all headless systems do that, but a lot of them can.
Yeah, it's definitely worth checking. Most of them have some form of it, but especially in glam, those transitions are really important. So having a look at and what options they have around those, and also around responsive imagery as well. So not just that they're going to optimize them for size, but that they'll automatically create a large number of different versions in the background that you won't see, that are focally supported for mobile and different responsive versions like iPad.
Cool. So one of the interesting questions we had come through was around digital experience platforms, so DXPs. I'm just going to read the question verbatim. So digital experience platforms are sold as the latest and greatest, providing more for business than headless. Please discuss, including the impact for decision makers. So first of all, I guess a digital experience platform, what is that?
Yeah, do you want me to take the first punt on that one, Teina?
Sure. We might as well just discuss it, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll go for it. So digital experience platforms, for those of you that aren't familiar with them, are kind of the ERPs of experience. So they do everything and anything, kind of your resort option. So they'll have websites in there, they'll have social media managers in there, they'll have marketing automation in there, just the whole remit, right? So you're talking about Adobe Experience Manager, software like that. So you're talking big, heavy products that have a lot of features in them and therefore come with usually a very hefty price tag. I don't know if that's changed in recent times, but the most recent conversations I've had around DXPs, you're kind of looking at subscription costs of 50K plus per year. Plus, on top of that, you need to consider time for implementation. So like Salesforce or a larger solution, there is a big cost that comes with that as well, and time and training. So the first difference between those two is going to be, what are you looking to spend? What's your budget? And then the other big question from my side is, what are you going to use, right? So the real benefit of a DXP is to bring together kind of control and globalization, from my experience anyway. So if you've got different marketing divisions across a country or across multiple countries, then it means that you can set really clear expectations around brand and how it's going to be used. Everyone uses the same pool of assets, the same pool of content, and you can ensure really great brand consistency globally. So you can think, retail shops, Coca-Cola, any of those large kind of brands are going to get a lot of benefit out of it. If you're a single institution with a single marketing team that's going to be using it, the value starts to decrease really in what you can do. And you potentially get a lot more limitations on what you can do as well, because you are locked in to using those features and those features alone. It becomes a much harder system to plug into. Yes, you lose a lot of that flexibility of kind of plugging a headless CMS into a full tech stack. So yeah, they have their place, but it's determining if that's the right place, even though it's popular.
Yeah, because there are big players in the market. I think we mentioned one, Adobe Experience Manager. There's also Sitecore and Optimizely, and there's a whole plethora of them. But yeah, we are looking at, I think those costs are in US dollars as well. So we're looking at 100K plus for implementation, and then ongoing licensing of tens of thousands of dollars each year. And I guess, but they do have their place. My question would be, is an organisation within New Zealand big enough to warrant it? I think just the impact for the decision makers, I think, yes, they are, and they're very well sold. But yeah, I think that flexibility of, you've got your headless content management system in there, you've got your CRM, you've got your social media manager tools. You'd have to look at the price of all of those, but then you'd have to look at how willing are you to back your investment for the next, 5 to 10 years. Because if you got a digital experience platform and you invested in that, you can't necessarily change out a single one of those. Well, you can, but you would effectively still be paying for it in a way. So I guess if you're more if you're being a little bit more nimble and you're creating a tech stack where you can pick and choose. So you might decide that you don't like your headless CMS and you can just swap that out for something else. Whereas if you've invested in this digital experience platform, you're paying for the whole package. It's a bit like a cruise, isn't it? A cruise versus a do your own holiday or something.
Yeah, that's probably a really good example of it. It can be easy in that it's got everything in it and you don't have to think about it, and full buffet every day, as you say, and you can kind of just go in and do it. But yeah, it's the exact same experience for everyone as well. So it's how do you set those things up? And you've got to have the infrastructure to support it too, like the internal process and team to support it and run it and learn it, and keep that internal training going as well. It's a big investment.
Yeah. But it does give you that centralized control, and if it's the right thing, then good on you to be able to afford it. The other thing, I guess, would be from a strictly collecting institution's point of view, I'm not sure I could ever see them incorporating a collections online piece. So
no, and
dams, some of them do have dams built in, but
dams are never going to replace what you need around collections. There's almost always going to be some form of integration that's still going to be required, whether that's to other legacy systems that you're using internally that they don't connect to, or bespoke systems that you use in your industry like Vernon or Tessitura. I mean, I think some of the experience managers might have booking systems as well and ticketing, that kind of stuff. But yeah, it just varies on kind of what you're using out of that platform and what you're crossing over into other platforms as well, and how they're all going to tie together. So you don't kind of get away from that integration piece by having a DXP. You're still going to have that pain as well. And integrating with those platforms is always more expensive, because they're heavy to integrate to. Yeah.
That's good to know. It should be said though that obviously headless CMS is like any new software that's introduced into a business. There is a learning curve, and and it might be a little bit steeper because of some of the issues we've touched in terms of it's not a WYSIWYG. It's not what you see is what you get. There's not. It's not as familiar to some people as WordPress or something like that. So there is definitely training that needs to happen up front with any kind of headless CMS integration. Yeah. Okay. Does anyone have any questions around that? Or comments? Or are you still out there?
Everyone just having lunch.
Yeah, they've just left it on. They've left us to it.
Nothing's come through the chat as yet, but people are welcome to put questions in the chat.
Awesome. We must be very comprehensive. Well, so I guess one of the big questions then is around that, what are some of the things from maybe a decision maker or side of things, like, sorry, there's just something on my camera. What would you need to consider as a business decision maker in terms of going for a headless CMS against all these other options that we've talked about, standard CMS, digital experience platform, etc.?
Yeah. I think the main ones that we get asked around headless CMS are laying a foundation for the future. I think is probably the biggest transition at this point, because it's not just about updating your website or updating the look and feel of it, or refreshing things or upgrading. It's about how you plan to use your content as channels get more and more diverse and people want different forms of interacting with an institution. So it's not just going to be about your marketing site. There's going to be lots of other things you want to spin up and play with. How can you do those all from one place? Where you can keep your content safe, stored, connected to whatever else it needs to be connected to. So one of those examples we're seeing at the moment is, you set the foundation, you get a base website or kind of your primary piece across into the headless CMS, and then you slowly transition. Teina, we went through this with Motad as well, right? Like we started with the marketing site, and then as the aviation hall came in, we managed to bring that in, and slowly things are coming into the fold. So I guess that's a really key thing to point out to stakeholders, is that it's a fundamental decision that you're making, but it doesn't mean you need to do every single bit of it right up front. You can do a transition into it and form that kind of basis for the future as well, which makes things a little bit easier sometimes, as you can tie in specific elements of the redevelopment of it into different budgets as you need, as you're going through for funding and that kind of stuff as well. So always worth keeping that in mind as you're touching these things anyway. Yeah, I think that's probably the biggest driver there, and overall just that usability of that content, and also that increase in security and performance that you're going to get across the remit as well, and just opening you up for flexibility of whatever direction you want to go in. If you would need to be nimble, if you need to react to market changes, as we saw happen with the pandemic, you've got the options there to, play around a little bit more and achieve a little bit more, and you're not hemmed in as you would be with a traditional CMS.
Great, thank you. Oh, there's some lovely comments coming through in the chat. Thank you. It's really good. Well, I guess one of the questions that came through was around real museum or gallery scenarios of these systems in action. And Amy and I can talk. I mean, Amy's got a few more up her sleeve, I'm sure, but I can talk to MOTAT. I can also talk to very briefly, but so one of the things that helped us make the decision to go with the Headless CMS Contentful at MOTAT was the British Museum's experience with Contentful. So they were on Contentful about 5 or 6 years ago now, and they used it for their website. They also used it for the in-gallery labels. They used it for their audio tours, other experiences as well. So they did a really comprehensive rollout of it and used it as a true content management platform. And that's exactly what we wanted to do within MOTAT. So we made the decision because we were embarking on a full digital transformation. So it was part of a tech stack that we were looking at that needed to play nicely with our Vernon collection management system. We needed something that would talk nicely to a CRM that was coming online. We knew we were going to improve our e-commerce side of things. We knew we needed to get in-gallery labeling happening, and we knew we needed to get a website up and running. So Headless was a clear decision for us there. So we went with Contentful, and it was a completely painless development experience, one of the most painless experiences I've ever had, and it was great. So we used we used a Gatsby front end, I think, and so and that was great. Let us basically define the designs we wanted. And the best thing is, as Amy has touched on, is that we had the website up and running, and then within a matter of months we had our first digital labels appearing using pages that we actually displayed on the website as well. So we did this really nice kind of, this information's on the website, but it's also available in gallery using touch screens. And then we went the whole hog with a really in-depth digital display within the aviation halls that was actually it used all the content coming from Contentful, but the front end was actually built in a game development platform called Unity, because we wanted it to feel like a game. And so it was really a really great stretch of what a Headless CMS can do in terms of creating content and spinning out content that was then going to be rendered in almost like a full game environment. And it's just gone on from there. So yeah, it's been a really great experience for MOTAT, a really solid foundation that was designed to set them up, for the next 5+ years. I say 5 years because that's a long time in technology, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's 5 to 10 to 12 years from now.
Yeah, the other benefit we've got with it as well is that a lot of the updates that come through to platforms like Contentful and CMSs, you don't have to manage so much of that to such an extent, which is fantastic. They do a lot of their own updating. Yeah, takes a little bit of the maintenance off the hands, a little bit of more surety. I think the big thing with what we've seen in this space, especially with what we went through with MOTAT, was understanding up front what it is you're trying to achieve. So it's not just about, cool, Headless CMS is a great idea, let's have a look at them. let's just pick one that we think is great or that we've been recommended. That's the other common one as well, is just because Contentful was the perfect fit for Motat doesn't mean it's going to be the perfect fit for someone else. There's quite a few really good headless CMS options out there. So, check reviews, but it's making sure that the job you need it to do is going to be fit for purpose as well. So kind of going back to those old core flows of understanding the user journeys, understanding the key jobs to be done, both externally and internally. So not just for your users that are coming both digitally and on site for their experience, but also your internal team and how you're wanting to use it, how you're wanting to spread it across your systems. That's going to be pretty key to understand. And then from there, you can look at the pool of headless CMS options that are out there and work out what are the more pivotal pieces. One of the key examples when we were looking at Contentful there was, I think Contentful had incredibly powerful content modeling and APIs. And because of how we really wanted to integrate it to a lot of off-premise off digital, so on-prem situations, then we wanted to focus on that. And some of the other platforms out there at the time, Storyblock and so forth, didn't have that capability. They do now, right? So things keep changing and adapting. So it's always getting in and having a look at what's available.
One of the questions I just see there is, other than Contentful, what other options would you suggest for a museum context? So maybe expand on that a little bit.
Yeah. So there are, this is the hard part of the moment. What platforms are out there? There are tons of platforms out there. Some of the ones that we hear the most often are ones like Sanity, Storyblock, Contentful. You've got traditional CMS options that are moving into headless, so you can do headless with tools like Silverstripe, Laravel, that kind of stuff if you need to. So yeah, again, it really for me just comes back to, if you're doing headless CMS, it's not something you're going to do internally unless you've got an internal development team. So you're going to either be using an agency or someone that's experienced in it. So what I'd recommend first is saying, right, why do we want to use headless CMS? What are we going to use it for? And then going through the process of discovery with them to kind of say, look, this is what we need out of it. Which platforms are you going to recommend will best fit that? And, that's their job. That's what you're paying them for. So, yeah, that's probably where I'd go for it rather than focusing on particular tools as such.
I think
there's another one that's pretty common. Yeah.
I think the pricing is quite a factor as well. So we were lucky with Contentful. We got it reasonably early and we got it at a community tier that actually was free. But that's no longer on offer. So Contentful is now not necessarily the most cost-effective option for a lot of people. I think, there's probably some other ones like Sanity, for example, has a great pricing model, I believe. So it is, unfortunately, there's a lot of research involved. But as Amy just said, be really clear on what you need and what you are going to need. So, think as far ahead into the future as you can, then take that to your agency and your developers and help let them make the decision. And it's always a good idea to sort of go with something that they're familiar and working with as well, because they'll know the systems inside and out.
Yeah, I guess because there's so many of them out there at the moment, I think the primary thing to watch out for when you're dealing with an agency is going to be experience in headless CMS, because the concept itself is very different. So if you've got an agency that specializes in Shopify and e-commerce or specializes in WordPress, they may not have the kind of ground level experience in headless CMS. So that is something I would recommend. Definitely get some checks and balances around that. Implementing headless CMS, they're all very similar at the end of the day as well. So if you're wanting to use something new that they haven't used before, or there's a better fit, don't let that stop you from exploring it if it's going to be potentially the right solution for you. Don't just rely on, well, we're a Contentful house, that's what we build. So you get locked into that as well. So yeah, I'd push back on that stuff a little bit where you can, because those skills are transferable. And at the end of the day, you need to get what's going to be the best fit for you. And pricing wise, another good trick as well is that talk to your account manager, get an account manager at these organizations, have a chat to them. Many cases we're dealing with amazing organizations that are looking to make an impact in the world. So, please, sir, give us a discount. And they can often do that. So they can give you a discount, they can put you on a pro bono type version as well. It's worth asking. So we've had a few people get that across the line, or they have free tiers like they do with Contentful. The gotchas with that is that, so the free tier is still available. They've just changed the amount of content models that you're allowed to have under it. So it kind of pushes a lot of people up into a paid version, and that can get really expensive really quickly. So thinking about that in advance as well. So for some of our non-for-profits that are on Headless CMS, it's a matter of thinking, okay, right, how can we shift and adjust a couple of those content models so you're still under that tier and you're not going to have to pay.
Another question here is wondering if Headless CMS works well with library management systems such as Koha or EDS.
Yeah. Essentially, because good question. I think the power of Headless CMS is that it's very API heavy. So it's your better choice and to integrate to anything than a more traditional CMS. So generally it's going to integrate better and play well with others in the sandbox, as we kind of like to think of it. A lot of it comes down to the system that you're integrating to and how old it is, what its APIs are like, and whether you can tap into them. If it's not going to work for a Headless CMS integration, you're probably going to struggle for a traditional CMS integration as well. If it already integrates to an older CMS or some other tools that are out there, then you can be fairly confident it's going to have the API available to work for Headless as well.
Awesome. Yeah, okay. I did start gathering a list of all the museums and that are on Headless, but it's a bit boring. But there are some ones that you may know of. So San Francisco, SF MoMA, M+ in Hong Kong, the Natural History Museum is actually on a DXP. So there you go. And I'm not sure what the Smithsonian is, but that's the kind of level of institution and scale that we would think would be on a DXP. But yeah, most of them are, as Amy said, most people now are developing in Headless just because of that flexibility. Does anyone have any questions or comments before we wrap up? Thank you all for your questions and thank you for joining us today. Awesome. Oh, thank you for all the kind words in the chat. We hope this has been informative. We will, it's our aim at NDF to have these as a regular occurrence now going forward. So we're going to try and do them monthly, if not fortnightly. And we'd love to know what other topics or questions or pain points or anything else you would like us to talk about. So do feel free to let us know. Drop us a line, admin@ndf.org.nz, catch us on LinkedIn, anything like that. Throw ideas down in the chat here. We would love to hear from you. And thank you so much for Amy for coming along today and sharing all her knowledge.
Help anytime.
If they have more questions, how do people reach you?
Just amy@pixelfusion.co.nz. So always happy to chat through options.
Excellent. So you've got the amy@pixelfusion.co.nz. Great. Well, that is us. Thank you very, very much for joining us. Thank you to Holly for running comms and sorting us all out, keeping us organised. E nohora.